I thought number one would surely be me. I thought I could be what I wanted to be. I thought I couldn't build on my own, but I can't even walk without you holding my hand.
Hi, my name is Kylie Wilson, and I'm a 7th grade student in Wake County. My classmates and I had the honor of interviewing African American elders from North Carolina about their lived experiences during the segregation and Jim Crow era. Through their stories, we learned powerful lessons about resilience, courage, and truth. We are proud to share this documentary with you titled Preserving Our Voices.
So the timeline of Wilmington's civil rights history is a little bit different. Wilmington was on the coast, and while we know that the capital of North Carolina today is Raleigh, that was a city that was created by the state legislature in 1792 because they had been meeting in New Bern and Edenton, and it was on the far side of the state from the Western population. And so the Western legislators did not like to have to go so far in order to come and do the business of the state. So in 1792, a commission was created by the state legislature to find a home for the legislature that was closer to the middle of the state. And that's how Raleigh ended up being it. Before that, because a lot of industry in North Carolina was on the coast, the bigger cities and towns were New Bern, Edenton, and Wilmington. Wilmington was the largest of the three because the port was here. And the population in Wilmington, when slavery ended, when the Civil War ended, was over 60% Black. We don't hear that about very many places in North Carolina. And as part of that, people were making money. People were elected officials. They were judicial officials. And they had crafted a slate of elected officers that was mixed. Not all Black, not all white. It was an integrated group. And they were doing the business of the state and making money. And this angered any number of white people because they did not want to see Black people telling them what to do. They did not want them to have control.
The Bellamy Mansion in Wilmington, North Carolina was built in the early 1860s for a rich white family. Enslaved African Americans and free Black workers built and took care of the mansion while the family lived in comfort. After the Civil War, many of these Black workers kept working in low-paying jobs, and life was still unfair for them in Wilmington. During the Jim Crow era, Black people had to live, work, and go to school separate from white people. The mansion shows this history because it was made by the Black people's work, but they did not get to enjoy the wealth it created. Today, the Bellamy Mansion is a museum that keeps the house and the areas where enslaved and later segregated workers lived and worked. Visitors can see the rooms where the workers lived, the kitchens, and the workspaces, which tell the story of the people who helped build and take care of the mansion. The Bellamy Mansion shows how slavery and Jim Crow affected Black people for a long time. It also shows how Black people were strong and kept going despite unfair treatment. The mansion is a reminder of both the hard times and the strength of the Black communities in Wilmington.
Hello, my name's Aiden Dorr. I'm from Neuse River Middle School and I'm 13. And I was just wondering how your life was like growing up with segregation and racism when you were my age.
Our parents taught us to be the very best that we could be and not to let anybody, just put our faith and trust in God, and not let anybody bring us down. There were 6 of us. 6 of us went to college. All of us, of course, finished college and, have had successful careers. And it was because of the way we brought up in our home, in our church. And then before us being in a segregated situation, we knew that we had to excel if we were going to make it, in the world. And our teachers taught us that, to put forth our best effort.
Was there ever a time where, like when you were being discriminated, was there ever a time you felt that, like, you just wouldn't get, like, has there ever been a time you have been so hurt by the discrimination that you had no faith in it ever changing?
Well, I had parents that encouraged us. Do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that. You can make it. I want you to go to school. You're smart. And the things that my parents taught us are the same things that I taught my daughter. For instance, when she went to college and she made a C in, I think, biology. And when I looked at her report card, I told her, I said, you're not a C student. You're better than a C student. So I took what I learned from my parents and tried to pass it on to my daughter.
So my parents always focused on the positives. So whatever the issues were at home or outside of the home, they always found the bright side of what was going on. And, that lesson is something that I've taken with me through my whole life. Yes, there may be unequal treatment, there may be negatives, there may be problems, but try to find the bright spot of what's taking place. And that was really the learning that's really propelled me to have become who I have become through the years.
Can you think of any main differences between how me and you are living now versus how you lived in the past during the Jim Crow era?
Nobody bothered me when I was in school. I didn't have the trouble of students. Well, they would talk about me, but my parents told us not to fuss back, to be quiet. And I learned how when students would bully me, don't say anything to them. And the ironic thing is, those same students would come back 5, 10 years down the road. Miss K, can you forgive me for the way I acted? Oh, sure, I forgave you. I forgave you then. They always come back and ask for forgiveness.
Our neighborhoods were African American, black, we called them. Sometimes they said colored or Negro or whatever, but we lived the same way we went to school. There were no white kids in our neighborhoods. There were no white kids at our churches. You'd see white kids if you went downtown, or when the fair was even segregated. There was a day for African American people or black people to go to the fair, and the other days were the white folks went. And the other thing, we had this dance thing, and it was called Teenage Frolics here in Raleigh. And at first, it was all white. And my sister and a friend of hers got on the phone and called WRL and said, when are the black people gonna get to come on? That was kind of in the early 60s, I think. And do you know, they said, okay, we need to do this. And so they had a black Teenage Frolics for a long time. And then guess what? It was only the black Teenage Frolics. But when we went, there were only black people on the Teenage Frolics that we went to, and there were only white people. But somehow we must have enjoyed it better or something, because it was every Saturday, and it was only black people.
St. Stephen's AME Church in Wilmington, North Carolina, has a rich and inspiring history that spans over 150 years, starting right at the end of the Civil War. African Americans wanted a place where they could worship freely and have full control over their own spiritual lives, leading them to form their own independent congregation. From its construction, the church became more than just a house of worship. It was a central pillar and rallying point for the entire African American community during the Jim Crow era. Throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries, St. Stephen's Church's role expanded dramatically.
So, how did segregation impact the institutions in our communities, the neighborhoods that we lived in, the schools and the churches? There were a number of things that we felt good about. We felt good about being in community with one another. We felt good about living close by. You hear elders talk about when they were growing up and they would come home from school. If mama was at work, then there was somebody in the neighborhood who was right there with them, or neighbors taking care of each other, making sure that if somebody was sick, families had food. Those were things that were done not just by neighbors, but by the churches.
How did you feel like going to school? Like, were you separated from the whites and the blacks?
I walked from school from my first grade to the 8th grade till things got better. And we had it rough coming back. We had to walk. Sometimes the other buses coming from the white children had buses, and they would come along and be walking on the road, and they would holler at us and say those kind of ugly words and throw paper at us and all that. But we didn't know we was coming from school, and we had to go to school rain or while. If our parents had no car to take us there, we had to walk. Most time my parents couldn't take me there, we had to walk.
Well, we had, our school was separate. We did have recess, and we did have cafeteria uses where we ate our food. Now that was here in Wilmington, but when I went to Dawson, South Carolina, we did not have such. We had to carry our lunches to school, and we had maybe a sweet potato, a cracker, well, I call it a greasy bag, and our milk was in a little pink bottle with a cap on it, and that's about what we had. We didn't have any soft drinks that you all are having now.
We have, soft drinks. We have those little cans of soda that we can buy, milk and water and juice. Yeah. How'd your teachers treat you?
Great, because I was trying to coat many of them. You know how, I don't know whether you've done that in your time or not, but in my time, if the teacher looked good, we wanted that teacher.
I grew up under segregated condition. Everything was segregated. I didn't go among the white until the military, but I went to an elementary segregated elementary school, and I went to segregated high school. What was so bad, my daddy had 35 acres of land, and we did our own farming, but we were still held back to something. We didn't get a lot of stuff that our white brethren were getting, But on the other hand, we did pretty good because it was a blessing. I had to walk to school while my white co-eds were riding the buses. We had to walk. I had to walk maybe about a half a mile to elementary school. And when I got ready to go to high school, it was a white high school right down the road from me, about 2.5 miles. But we had to be bused to Southport with the 18 miles. So we couldn't go to the white school. It was a law that we couldn't go there, segregation law. And so I didn't have no cooperation with the white, or either I didn't, associate with them whatsoever. We might have worked on the white farm some, but other than that, we wasn't in school with them, anything like that.
May you go back and tell more about the incident in '69 and your personal experiences?
One thing I do remember that I think is significant I'm not sure how old I was, but I could read when I was very little or young. And we stopped at a store. The store is still in Supply. That's where I live, Supply, North Carolina. There's a store out on 17, and it has a sign out there now that says Fulford's Heating and Air. And years ago, there were 3 bathrooms. One that said men, one that said women, and the other said color. Well, I was a little girl, and I knew I was to go to women, so I went to women and found out later that I was not supposed to go to that bathroom. I was supposed to go to the one that said color, and it's in the back. I can remember this. There's the men, the women, and then you go around the corner and it's color. And I gotta stop there one day and see if that restroom is still there. I'm sure the signs are gone. And my cousin's husband worked there, and he told Daddy, he said, she's not supposed to go to that bathroom. I also remember going to a separate waiting room at a doctor's office in Charlotte. The waiting room in the front was for white patients, the waiting room in the back was for black patients. That's how we were separated. I don't know how they waited on us, but I knew we didn't all sit in the same room. I remember working in a restaurant. I was 13, and if you were black, you had to go in the front and order your food and pay for it and go around back, and the food was handed out the back door. You couldn't sit down in the restaurant. It was the Charlotte truck stop. Well, not Charlotte, it was like between Charlotte and Grissettown. And what's there now is a rental place or something like that. But I remember that. My mother, one of the reasons I remember, my mother was a cook there. She cooked at night. What is it, 12 to 7 or something. And on weekends, I helped her. I washed dishes while she cooked. And that way, I saw what went on. And I remember the night that it all changed. And this truck driver, because it was a truck stop, so a lot of truck drivers stopped there to eat. This truck driver came to the back door to order his food. My mother said, "Oh no, you can eat in the front now with everybody else." And she just escorted him. Latoya knew my mother, she was kind of abrupt at times. And she just escorted him through the kitchen to the dining area. And after that, I remember everybody ate in that same dining room. But I do remember when it was separate.
Schools were almost the same. In a lot of cases, when schools first started, the teachers would stay in the home of someone in the neighborhood where the school was, and they might go from house to house for more than one reason. One, because one family couldn't afford to take care of the teacher's needs all the time. So the community would share those needs with the teacher. But also, the teacher didn't want anybody jealous that one family was keeping her or him all the time. And so students got the opportunity to learn in groups. There weren't all the classrooms that we have when we go to school today. When schools first started, there might be 1, maybe 2 or 3 rooms for the entire school. And so based on age, sometimes it was the age, the youngest people sat in the front and the older people sat in the back of the room. And so the teacher would teach everybody in the school. So there wasn't a teacher for first, second, third, fourth grade like that. There was one teacher for the entire classroom. And the teachers had to know all the subjects. So it was important to open colleges that Black students could attend, because what people who had been enslaved felt was that education and owning property were the ways to get ahead. So you suddenly saw colleges open, or normal schools. Some of the colleges in North Carolina were normal schools. They had school for elementary and high school and college. And in some cases, there were Rosenwald schools that were created by Julius Rosenwald from Chicago. He was the owner of Sears, and he had a philanthropy mindset, and he would donate money towards building schools in the communities. North Carolina probably had almost more Rosenwald schools than any other state, but he would donate a certain amount, or his foundation would, and then the community would do things to help make up the deficits so that the schools could be built. So while segregation was not the best thing, it was good in terms of the fact that we were able to take care of ourselves.
My name is Nia. I'm 12 years old. I'm a student at Neuse River Middle School, and I was reading up on you, and I watched a couple videos on YouTube, and I seen that adults have interviewed you, and I just want to know a little bit about yourself.
School was the center of the community. School and church were the centers, but school more than the church, because the church you had voluntary people coming there. It was mandatory that you go to school. Everybody had to go to school.
Yes.
So you would meet everybody. You would meet some of them in every walk of life, but school was the one place in which you met everybody who was of your race. Therefore, it was predetermined in my mind that I would one day be an educator, because I thought the most glamorous thing you could possibly be, the most serviceable thing you could possibly be, the best service you could render was to teach. I still believe that, by the way. That is not to criticize anybody else doing what they do. But everybody who does anything, where do you think they started? They learned it from school.
Right.
So I've been a part in my mind of anybody that you know, whatever success they've had, they started at school. So that has been my life, and that has been my mission. It continues to this very day, because I rarely pass a week that I don't go to somebody's school. I've been retired for 40 years, but I still go somewhere where there's some young people like you, because it's my mission. It's why I'm on earth.
But when you realized that you were different than other people, and you started going through racism, and kids were calling you names, did that make it harder to become successful?
I think my world and my eyes opened up about racism when I watched my father do a lot of things around trying to change our accessibility to the things that were available in the county. I can remember he talked my sister and one of my cousins into integrating a truck stop, which at the time they did it, I didn't fully understand what was going on, except I knew we could never go to that truck stop. There was an ice skating rink. We could never go to the ice skating rink. And so those were the little ways that the segregation impacted my life. We were farmers, and we quite often, because there were 7 of us, we would go and work, some white farmer's farm. And I think that's when I started to realize that we got treated differently. We quite often got called names. We weren't allowed in their house to eat lunch or, things like that. So you start to feel it, but I think when I really realized and felt it most was when I got asked by my parents if I would integrate Charlotte High School. And you went under what is called the Freedom of Choice Plan. They only allowed the odd numbered grades to be able to choose to go to the white school.
I was in the first class at the school that I went to in Brunswick County. And the first day when we got ready to go to school, the bus came by. We get on the bus, and they direct us to the back of the bus, the back seat of the bus. But when the white kids got on the bus, they had the privilege of sitting on the front seats of the bus. So that was, and every morning we would get on the bus. Y'all go to the back of the bus, but when the white kids got on, you sit up here. So they sat right beside the driver or right behind the driver. So needless to say, we go to school that day. It wasn't too bad that first day, but one of the things that just stood out was that when the bus driver stopped in front of the white kids' house, the parents would be on the porch, and they would be looking like this, they'd be doing like this. If they saw us on the bus, then they would wave the bus on by, So the day that we got to school, I think I was going into the 11th grade, the day we got to the school building, there were more parents at the school that had brought their children to school rather than let them ride the bus with us than probably anybody else.
As I said earlier, sometimes because the predominant of folks who were outside of a urban area like Wilmington or New Bern or Raleigh, or Winston-Salem or Charlotte, people who lived in more rural areas had to stop school earlier because crops would come in and the whole family was required at home to take care of those crops. So they might only go to school for 4 months a year. It makes a difference in how much you're able to learn and the amount of time you're able to spend. Churches, as I said, were everywhere. And it was a joyous thing to go to church. It wasn't like when people were enslaved and if they went to church, they had to only hear certain parts of the Bible. They were only taught certain parts because the slave masters did not want them to know anymore. There were other people who were able to provide money to help build churches, and sometimes schools would be attached to the churches. And finally, businesses would grow. A lot of businesses grew out of the things that people who had been enslaved knew how to do. In rural areas, there probably weren't very many barbers. There might be 1 or 2 barbers. In areas like Wake County in Raleigh, there were 22 barbers down the street from the Capitol. And people who had those skills, they had carpentry skills, they were able to make tools and shoe horses. They were able to make good money because those were things that the people who had been the enslavers had not had to do. They had someone else to do it for them. So they would come and spend their money with folks who were African American. And they would be able to buy property from those things or make sure that they could help take care of the needs of other people in their family or their community.
Williston High School started in 1866 to educate newly freed Black people. In 1923, it became the first accredited high school for Black students in North Carolina. For decades, Williston was a central institution in the Black community in Wilmington, a hub of culture, pride, and academic achievement. In 1968, during a court-ordered desegregation, the new Hanover County School Board closed Williston High. The Black students from Williston were reassigned to New Hanover High and John T. Hargard High, which caused community pain and controversy. The closure of Williston was a part of a larger struggle over integration and is linked historically to the Wilmington 10 case. Today, the original high school building is no longer in use as a high school. The site houses Williston Middle School of Math, Science, and Technology.
I thought I could do a lot on my own. I thought I could make it all alone. I thought of myself as more than I am, but I can't even walk without you holding my hand.
So I want to talk a little bit about the origins and then the effects of Jim Crow in North Carolina. We tend to think of Jim Crow as starting in the early 1900s or shortly after the Wilmington coup, when the Democrats wanted to take power back from the Republican and the Fusionist parties. But really and truly, as soon as the Civil War ended in 1866, the General Assembly passed some laws called the Black Codes. And I just want to tell you a little bit about what they are. So not only did they ban marriages between blacks and whites as of 1872, but they stopped things like allowing people to appear in court. So you couldn't go to court unless you had a person of color, and you couldn't be on a jury. You had to. It was restricted for white people. Contract sales. So if you were trying to sell something and it was more than $10, you had to have a white person to witness the sale. Certain things that were criminal punishments were worse for blacks than for whites. These were some of the white supremacist controls that were put in force in 1866. By 1869, we had laws for separate schools, separate appropriations for those schools. While it was allowed to have schools for both blacks and whites, black children, their school systems could not afford to stay in school as long as the white students were. And so that already created some educational inequality on top of the fact that it was against the law to teach people who were enslaved how to read and write to begin with.
So, getting into Jim Crow laws and things like that, when you were older and like Jim Crow laws, did that affect you?
Yes, whenever we go to the tobacco markets and things that sell tobacco, they had white fountains and black fountains. And we couldn't drink out the white fountain. I don't know what they were, that it all come from, but we had to drink out the black fountain. You know, they had white restrooms and black restrooms. You know, they had all of that. And as I said, it was about until I got into my 20s that I began to associate with the white. In the military, then in college, you know.
So after you went to Shaw University, how were you treated as an educated black woman during Jim Crow?
I was treated okay. I learned how to keep my mouth closed. My dad said you didn't always have to speak, just be quiet sometimes. He had this thing that if somebody bullied my father, put him down, he would look at them and wouldn't say anything. And my brothers would be just raging to get in there and fuss them out or throw them out if they were talking to my dad. And he said, no. His thing was, they have an education. I don't. But everybody who gets an education is not educated. I learned that from my father. You have to act out education. You don't just speak out just because you're educated. Be quiet sometime. And it's better to be quiet sometime and speak later. Because once you say something, you can't put it back in your mouth. It's gone. So I was treated fine. I can't say I was treated bad. No.
What was it like for you to grow up in North Carolina?
Well, for the first 14 years of my life, it was in the Jim Crow segregated time. And I like to tell people that I lived in a bubble. And that is, I lived in a community that was all black. It was all relatives. So we were protected from some of the harshest acts of racism. We knew about the Ku Klux Klan, and we heard about bad things that were happening to black people because of racism. But in those formative years, our family kept us close. My first encounter with racism had to do with going to the doctor. We were always placed in the colored waiting room. And if there were whites there to be treated, they were always treated first before the black patients were treated. I remember there being colored water fountains and white water fountains. When I was a girl about your age, my mother went to the drugstore. She took me along. I was not feeling well. and she had to go in and get some medication. And she wanted me to go in the store with her. I didn't want to go in the store with her. You know how middle schoolers are. I didn't want to go in the store with her because I knew she'd have to wait until all of the white patrons were served before she was served.
As she was saying about water fountains and facilities, that was very prevalent. However, in my particular area, we were kind of on par with white people. We never, what's the term for it? We never sharecropped or anything like that. Both sides of my family owned their own land. And in many instances, we were, in a way, better off. We had running water, toilet facilities, where many people in that area still utilized outhouses and pump well water and things like that. However, while coming up on the farms, I had interaction with many whites, and they treated us pretty decent. I've never had anybody anywhere to call me a nigger. I often wondered what I would do if they did. Early on in life, I may have had some adverse reaction to it, but as I've gotten older, I understand that it's ignorance and people just don't understand. So now I think I'd react a little bit different.
This is the 1898 Memorial Park, which was built to confront the truth of America's only successful coup d'etat, which white supremacist leaders overthrew the government and terrorized the city's black residents. Countless men and women were killed, driven from their homes, or erased from the community they helped build. For decades, the story was buried with silence and public denial. The park stands as a place to raise awareness and allow people to reflect and heal.
Lord, I can't even walk without you holding my hand. The mountains are high and the valley is too wide, but down on my knees, Lord, I learned to stand, but I can't even walk without you holding my hand.
How did you get from teaching kids to desegregating schools?
I took a principalship in what had heretofore been an all-black school, but they were under a mandate to desegregate the school. And that was what I went there for, was to desegregate that particular school, which had been all black. So we had begun that desegregation process, and then the state of North Carolina's superintendent called me and said, we need you to come to Raleigh and work for the state to desegregate all of the public schools in the state of North Carolina. So I reluctantly left my students in Bethel, which was a little town where I was principal, and went to Raleigh for the purpose of helping to lead the desegregation of the public schools throughout the state. I still would never stop teaching, because the desegregation process was a teaching process. It was a very different kind of teaching process, but you had to change people's way of thinking about something. And that's what teaching it is. It's changing. We like refer to it as changing their narrative. Everybody has a way that he or she is thinking about a given thing. Sometimes it's based on facts, sometimes on myth, sometimes it has absolutely no basis. But you can't walk up and tell somebody, you ought to think differently than this. You have to do it differently, so you have to teach another narrative, another way to think about that. You have to teach another way to stop stereotyping people, to stop classifying people that you know nothing about. So that was a teaching process. I would not have taken it had it been something other than a teaching process, but I realized going in that what you're going to have to do is help people to understand a different way of looking at each other, different way of responding to each other, different way of behaving toward each other. a different comfort level around each other. So the desegregation process was 100% teaching. I had no power. I couldn't make you do anything. So my persuasion was rest on having you to understand there's a different way to do this that might be better.
So, like, why were we segregated anyway?
Because people believe, and some still do, that that underneath the skin we're not the same. And so from way back, they've got this idea that if you're a certain color, if your hair looks a certain way, if your nose and your lips look a certain way, you're different from a person who doesn't look that way. It's really ignorance. It's not knowing any better, I think. And, but you know, some of that stuff has lasted until right now. There are still people who believe that way. But those of us who are kind and have good sense, I think, we know that human beings are all the same. We might be bigger, and the Constitution, the preamble to the Constitution says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, and that means men and women, are created equal. And then it goes on to say that we have these rights, and they are birthrights. So in the beginning, they knew better. They just didn't do better. And so we've been working for years to try to do better. And that's where we are now. We're still trying to do better.
I was the first Black person to serve as president of the North Carolina School Food Service Association. That was because I was very aggressive. I treated everybody just alike. That organization has more whites than it does blacks. So I had to influence people in order to make strides that I wanted to make. And that was a good example of that.
When I enrolled at NC State, again back in the mid-60s, I was one of the first set of students to help integrate North Carolina State University. I wasn't the very first, but there was only a handful of African American students that came when I came, and you know, with 15,000 students, to maybe there was 25 of us in the whole school. So just a handful of us really integrating the university at that time. And I had been in segregated high school, all black high school, and before then, all black elementary school. So the integrated university was a very different experience for me. And of course, you know, I termed it as, we were seeing a revolution outside of the campus, you know, in the community and the country at large, with the civil rights movement that was being led by Dr. Martin Luther King and so many others, where there was protests of marches all over the country for better equal rights, better freedom, our civil rights. We also had the Vietnam War that was being that was going on at the same time. But at NC State, there was a revolution inside of the classroom, because this was the first time that they had seen, you know, African Americans in the classrooms with white students in the numbers that we had, you know, 25 or 30 students.
Robert Robinson Taylor was the first formally trained African-American architect and the first Black graduate of MIT, best known for designing many of the major buildings at Tuskegee Institute and helping develop its architecture and industrial education programs. During the Jim Crow era, his achievements were especially important because they demonstrated Black excellence in a field that largely excluded African Americans, expanded educational and economic opportunities for Black students, strengthened a key Black institution, and challenged racist assumptions about Black intellectual ability. In 1938, the Housing Authority of the City of Wilmington announced plans to construct a new $1 million housing project for African Americans.
On Sunday, I met Jesus. He's my all and all. From now on, when I'm in trouble, only his name I call. For if I don't trust him, I'll be less than I am. But I can't even walk without you holding my hand.
Were there any stories that you remember in the media that you found it particularly impactful or shocking to you?
Well, yes. There were a number of stories during my formative years growing up. Clearly, the Little Rock, Arkansas integration of the schools, and where the kids were, initially denied from being able to attend, those schools back in the 50s. There was the Greensboro 4 in 1963 trying to integrate the lunch counter at Woolworth, the way that sit-in went on for, a long time before they finally gave in. The bombing of the 3 girls in Alabama at the church on a Sunday morning that were murdered by a bomb. How hateful and mean that was. But what was so inspirational was the North Star that we had in terms of fighting for progress. We knew that climbing this mountain would be very tough, and people never gave up.
Why do you think it's important to preserve African American history?
Good question. First of all, because it's the truth. And second of all, when we tell the history of African people as well as slavery, then we know never to do that again. If we don't, we miss all the great things that African as well as African people have done.
What advice would you give to younger African American black males?
Well, I would say I can see in you that you care about your looks, you care about your appearance, and that'll take you a long ways in itself. I would say that you need to study hard. Don't believe everything that people tell you. Social media can be good, but it can also give you an ignorance streak. And so be careful of what people tell you and what you see on social media. And read. Get some books. Go to the library. Whatever source you can learn different things. Do so. Just fill your mind with as much study as possible.
There's a saying that if you don't know where you came from, then you don't know where you're going and how to get there. And I think if there has been any question of the need to understand the history of racism in this country, the moment we're in right now tells us that. Because of all the work and effort everyone, including myself, has done to make everybody try to have equal access to things, equal opportunity for things. What has happened in the last year has so much impact for kids and students like you, for young people coming out of college.
I'm absolutely certain without question that if we don't know our history, we tend to repeat it. And we not only repeat that which is positive, but we repeat that which is negative. So we need to know our history. Everybody needs to know everybody's history. I taught world history at one point, and I needed to know that because We didn't start this country. It came from Europe and other places. So if we don't know our history, then there's a missing concept in our mind about who made what kind of contributions and how capable people were and how adventuresome they were and that sort of thing. African American history shouldn't be any different than any other history. It should be taught every single day of our lives. I teach it every day, by the way. I don't have a book of it. I'm never going to, I am it. I manifest it.
Lord, I can't even walk without you holding my hand. My mountains are so high and the valley so wide. Down on my knees, oh Lord, I learned to stand. That I can't even walk without you holding my hand.